A very good morning to all the distinguished dignitaries, panelists, and the participants. On behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, and Himachal Pradesh State Disaster Management Authority, I welcome you all to 3 days online training program on hill area environment development with focus on earthquakes, landslides, and floods. NIDM under its Geometeorological Risk Management Division has established Center for Hill Area Development to foster the strategies for sustainable development and enhance the resilience of our hilly areas. To achieve the desired goal, this 3 days online training program on hill area environment and development with focus on earthquakes, landslides, and floods is being organized. Earthquakes, landslides, and floods are major disasters in our hilly states and are also interconnected. Earthquake can initiate landslides, floods can trigger landslides, and collapse of landslide dam lake can cause floods. So we need to adopt a holistic multi-hazard approach for managing the risk of these disasters. To enlighten us more on the various facets of sustainable hill area development, we'll be having distinguished speakers throughout the training program. There will be 2 sessions, inaugural and technical one. For inaugural session, we have dignitaries, namely Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, VSM Executive Director, NIDM, DC Rana, IS Director comes Special Secretary, Revenue Disaster Management, HPSDMA, and Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division, NIDM. For technical session, experts, namely Dr. Anil Prakash Joshi, recipient of Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan and founder of Himalayan Environmental Studies and Conservation Organization, and Dr. Hari Kumar, Coordinator Geohazard International, will join us. To enlighten more on this 3 days training program, now I request Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division, NIDM, for his introductory address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anilji. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. First of all, a warm welcome to all the dignitaries in the inaugural program and also to all the delegates and participants of this online training program. I welcome you on behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, and on my personal behalf as program chair for this 3 days online training program. I would also first of all like to thank HPSDMA for collaborating with us in this 3 days online training program, and particularly Shri DC Rana ji, Special Secretary, Government of Himachal Pradesh, who has kindly agreed at a short request from our side to organize this as a collaborative training program. The participation from the hill states is a welcome step, and their willingness to cooperate and collaborate with us is a step ahead in our journey towards disaster risk reduction and resilience in the hill states. Our Center on Hill Area Development has been carrying out activities on this since the COVID-19 situation in the online mode as webinars and online training courses. Just yesterday also we had one webinar on the hill environment, climate change, sustenance and safe development in the hilly terrains. So we have been working on this, and we have been focusing on the conditions which are changing with time. You know that with the changing climatic conditions, the glaciers are melting, the river discharges are increasing, the river erosion is leading to landslides and flash floods. Also, our Himalayan terrain, which is almost 2,400 kilometers long and 250 to 400 kilometer wide, is also prone to seismic activities. This is geodynamically active, youngest folded mountain chain in the world. So all these Himalayan states are prone to earthquakes also, besides the occurrences of landslides, floods, glacial lake outburst floods, a landslide dammed lake outburst floods, dam bursts, and several other kinds of disasters, including lightning, epidemics, hailstorms, and droughts. We are primarily focusing on natural hazards, which can be assessed, predicted, and prevented. However, we are also including those hazards which may not yet be predictable, but their consequences can be preventable. So there are inevitable but preventable disasters. On the other hand, we have predictable and preventable disasters, which we will talk about during these 3 days. I welcome our experts, Shri Hari Kumar ji from Geohazards International, Dr. Anil Prakash Joshi ji from HASCO. Despite their busy schedule, they are with us. Dr. Kishore Kumar and several other experts have also joined with us. And we are lucky to have more than 550 participants. Almost every day we are getting usually more than 1,000 participants across the country. They are joining from different parts of the country. And not only we are focusing on the Himalayan terrain, we are also focusing on the hill areas in the southern part of the country, both Eastern Ghats and the Western Ghats, which have also suffered landslides and other kind of floods and other natural disaster hazards. Besides this, there would also be focus on anthropogenic interventions in the form of developments and growth of population within these areas. Now, as the development is taking place, we are having more concentration in the hills, and also as the pollution is rising in the metropolitans and the urban areas, the people are diverting themselves towards the hills, which are at present quite safe in terms of the levels of the pollution in the atmosphere. So we have good natural resources. We are going for mining, construction, development, and other activities in the hills. So we have to actually very sure of a planned scientific development rather than chaotic, piecemeal, ad hoc nature of developments and disaster management. So our main aim of Hill Area Development Center is to mainstream disaster risk reduction and resilience with development and growth of the people, looking into the economy, environment, and energy sectors, which are the basic requirements for any human population. So we will be talking on all these parameters, different aspects and dimensions, including the sources of the problem, causes of the problem, factors of the problem, dimensions of the problem, in order to resolve them. Besides this, we are also focusing on the international agreements which have been done by Government of India, that is Sendai Framework of Disaster Risk Reduction, Paris Climate Agreement, and also the Sustainable Developmental Goals. In addition, we will also talk about New Urban Agenda, which is also looking into the urbanization process in the hill areas. So various kind of line departments would also be responsible. So we will be joining hands with the HP SDMA, which will look at the state level issues and also reflect the challenges and the opportunities for disaster risk reduction and resilience. So with these words, I welcome all the participants. Most likely Executive Director NIDM may not be able to join us in this inaugural program due to his preoccupation with some other important activities. So I welcome participants on his behalf and share his message of good wishes for the program. With these words, I pass over to Mr. Anil Kathak.
Thank you very much, sir, for your introductory address. Now I hand over the mic to Sri D. IS Deputy Director cum Special Secretary, HPSDMA, for his opening address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Let me first thank NIDM, the Hill Area Development Division of NIDM, Major General Bindalji, who is the Executive Director, Dr. Surya Prakash, who is the head of the division conducting this online training workshop for 3 days. We are very privileged to collaborate with the NIDM and be part of this training session. We had one session earlier also, and it was a great success, attended by large number of people. And today also, there's a very good participation of participants from across the hill regions of the country. Dr. Surya Prakash has already set the context as why discussions on hill area development and issues and challenges which we face is important, and what are the challenges available, why those challenges exist, and what are the institutional and other frameworks which are available, and how we need to work to reduce the vulnerability of Himalayan areas. We have not forgotten what happened in Uttarakhand in 2013 when one glow event and led to sequence of disaster and killed so many people, devastated a large number of areas, and a lot of loss of life and property was has taken place in that event. So if we look at the context of Himachal, we are prone to almost most of the hazard, except for those which are endemic to coastal areas or volcanic activities. Other than these main prominent hazard, Himachal is prone to that. We are highly vulnerable to earthquakes, and I think a serious effort to mitigate the effect of earthquake is required. And at the same time, landslide is a huge challenge. 13th October was the International Day for Disaster Reduction, and UNDRR was releasing a lot of data, a lot of facts and figures about how different disaster impact us. So one of the data which they released pertained to the deaths which have taken place from the year 2000 to 2019 because of different disasters. So during this period, that is 2000 to 2019, 7,21,318 people died of earthquake, and the share of disaster deaths because of earthquake was more than 58%. So that brings us to focus on earthquake, though it is not a regular event. It is an event which happens after decades, or it is repeated after a century or more than that. But earthquake is, I think, one of the biggest challenge, and all hill areas face almost the same kind of challenge. That is development in the area which is highly vulnerable, adhering to building codes, and then undertaking construction in area which are not very safe. Another data which UNDRR shared was disaster-wise deaths which occurred. So in Indian Ocean tsunami 2004, more than 2.26 lakh were killed. That was in single event. Haiti 2010, 2.22 lakh people were killed. Sichuan, China 2008, 87,000 plus people were killed. Myanmar 2008, 1.38 lakh people were killed. So that is the potential of an earthquake. And landslide is an event which we face regularly. We need to prepare for that. We need to build capacity to treat landslides. Before that, we need to build capacity to prepare DPRs, to have technical know-how and capacity to undertake geotechnical investigations, and then spend money on that, on those activities, so that the impact of landslide are reduced. Now there is no issue of availability of funds. Now funds are available. Mitigation fund under State Disaster Response Fund and National Disaster Response Fund is available from this year onwards. But the huge challenge will be the technical know-how and also capacity of the institutions to undertake earthquake risk mitigation, landslide risk mitigation, and a workshop like this should lead to action, and I think more capacity building exercises are required. I hope this 3-day exercise would lead to more awareness about these activities, and also our resolve to mitigate the risk. So I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants, and I thank NIDM for organizing this event. And let us hope this will be a very fruitful exercise, as we have very learned speaker connected with us, and will be all benefited with their experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your address. As Professor Surya Prakash has already mentioned, Executive Director NIDM was supposed to join us, but due to some unavoidable and urgent task, he is not able to join. So he has best wishes for the training program. Now we move ahead for today's technical session. For participants, there are few information as well as instruction. Attendance will be automatically generated via Cisco WebEx platform, and feedback form will be provided on last day of the training program. So it is requested to avoid asking for attendance and feedback form in chat box. And to be eligible for certificate, 80% attendance in each day of the training program is mandatory. Participants are also requested for their active participation by raising their queries, which they can share through Q&A box. Hazards are attributes of nature that facilitate her transformation. It's our haphazard activities that turn them into disasters. We can't totally avoid the episodes of disaster to happen, but what we can do is to eliminate or reduce their adverse impacts through various mitigation measures. And to elucidate more on this topic, I request Dr. Hari Kumar, Coordinator, Geohazard International. He is a civil engineer with more than 3 decades of experience in the field of safe shelter, disaster risk management, and earthquake risk reduction. As regional coordinator of South Asia, he is responsible for work in India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar. This includes several programs that build the capacity of engineers and builders to assess and improve disaster resilient construction, assist policymakers in implementing new strategies that reduce disaster risk, improve ability of health facilities to function post-disasters. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Anil ji. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of this very, very important training program, and on a very, very important subject also, because the fact is that our urban risk is increasing generally throughout the country, but the hill towns, the hill cities, the risk is actually spiraling beyond anyone's imagination. The kind of growth we are seeing in various hill towns, possibly without much concentration on disaster management, is really something we need to stop and think about. So I will quickly take you through the risk mitigation challenges of hill towns, because as we all know, urban risk reduction is a different challenge altogether when you compare it with say doing risk reduction in a rural setting. Urban risk reduction is more difficult, but still more difficult is the risk reduction in an urban setting in the hills. They have very, very different challenges, and I will try to quickly take you through the challenges of risk mitigation in hill towns in India, with actually a slight focus on one of the most risk-prone hill towns in the country, in the capital of Mizoram, in Aizawl. We will look at Aizawl slightly more deeply and try to think about what can happen in the other hill towns in the country. So, as has been mentioned by Surya sir, the multi-hazard profile of hill towns include earthquakes, landslides, rock falls, floods, blow-off events, climate change events, you name it. Most of the hazards that can affect the rest of the country can affect the hill towns and with much more severity. On the map here shows the earthquake-prone areas of the country, the seismic zoning map of the country, which is part of the IS code 1893, and you see the red spots and the deep orange spots. These are the zone 4 and the zone 5s. That is the high risk zone and the maximum risk zone. And you can see all along the Himalayas, we are nearly uniformly in zone 4 or zone 5. And that is where also, this is the landslide hazard zoning map. And that is exactly where we have the landslide problem as well. And when these two, and they are highly connected with each other. Earthquakes do trigger landslides, and the effects of the earthquake along with landslides can be devastating in most of the cases. We've had a lot of earthquakes in the Himalayas, the Himalayan plate boundary. I mean, that is the plate boundary. This is where the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate meet. And this has produced a lot of major earthquakes. A few are cited here: the 1905 Kangra event, 2005 Muzaffarabad event, 1803 event, which even affected Delhi, 2015 Nepal earthquake, 1505 event in the Nepal-India border, 1934 in the Bihar-Nepal border, the 1950 event and in Arunachal Pradesh, China border. So all of these have affected, the hill towns and the hilly areas of our country and in the neighboring countries. And there are certain areas like in this area between the Kangra earthquake and the 2015 Nepal earthquake have been areas where there has not been much seismic activity for the last 200, 300 years. And this is not good news, because that is where the chances of an earthquake happening is more. They say that you are always between two earthquakes, and the further away you are from the last earthquake, the closer you are to the next one. So not good news for people who are living close to that seismic gap, as we call it, between Kangra and the Nepal border, especially parts of Uttarakhand, UP and all can be affected by major event happening here. This growing earthquake risk in the Himalayas, some of the cities, the growth which are happening in our hill towns like Shimla, like Gangtok, like Aizawl, the growth is phenomenal. An earthquake striking here can have devastating effects because of the huge exposure that we are creating with, as Surya Sir himself just pointed out, unplanned development, which is really putting more and more people at risk. And some of the examples of past events, the Commune region 1803, we talked about all of these, and they have progressively affected more and more populations in the region, showing the increasing risk. And some of these earthquakes have also triggered rock falls, landslides. Some of these have blocked rivers, like the 1950, the Independence Day earthquake, which affected most of Assam, as it was called. The entire Northeast was called Assam in those days. And several of the rivers were dammed by landslides, which actually broke after a couple of days, causing floods after these temporary blockages were released. So the earthquake risk in the Himalayas is growing, regardless of whether you are in the upper Himalayas or in the lower Himalayas. Some of our hill towns, I'll just list out a few: Shimla, Dehradun, and most of these, Gangtok, Agartala, Shillong, Aizawl. Agartala cannot strictly be called a called the hill town. It's not part of the hill town, even though it's in seismic zone 5. The landslide risk is also there in most of these cities. So as far as hill towns are concerned, most of these are earthquake prone. Most of these are also landslide prone. And the chances of earthquake-induced landslide is high. These are rapidly expanding and into more and more. As populations are increasing, our constructions are getting onto more and more dangerously sloping ground, dangerously fragile ground. We are building on dangerous slopes now as the cities expand. There is limited response capacities. If you look at any of these cities, on its own, the response capacities are limited. They will definitely need help from external sources, and whether these external sources will be there to help them in the event of a large earthquake affecting a large number of cities is anybody's guess. Much of the preparedness is response focused, but not enough can be done within the city without getting assistance from outside. And there is limited road access to these towns, very limited road access. Many of these towns, like Gangtok, has just one main road leading to it from the rest of the country. The connection to Gangtok from the rest of the country is one national highway. Aizawl is connected by 2. Many of our towns have limited connectivity, and in an earthquake, you can expect there to be landslides. And even if it is just one rockfall, you can imagine how much that is going to, this kind of a rockfall is going to affect the connectivity to the cities up there. This is photograph is from Himachal. This is not an earthquake-induced rockfall, but an rockfall which took weeks to clear. And you can imagine there will be several of these kind of blockages in the event of an earthquake, because an earthquake is going to trigger many landslides and many rockfalls at the same time. And so many of these cities are going to be on their own in responding to the earthquake and the landslides which are happening. So as again, Surya sir mentioned the international frameworks, and one of the first things mentioned in the Sendai framework is you need to understand your risk. You need to understand fully well what can happen in your hill town. What are the things which can happen? You can, it is not enough to say that, okay, if there is an earthquake of this intensity striking my city, 10,000 people will be affected. That's not enough to know. We have to understand what will happen to the roads, what will happen to my water supply system, what will happen to my electricity system, what will happen to my hospitals, what will happen in my schools. All of these in total will comprise the risk in your place, and we need to understand risk. So it is one of the first priorities in the Sendai framework that we understand risk, that it already outlines a set of recommendations, and that we need to understand risk and we need to use risk information towards risk reduction. So when we talk about DRR, we talk about risk reduction, but first we need to understand what are we trying to mitigate, what we need to understand the risks. And Sendai framework also recognizes that all the stakeholders and actors need to understand the risks they are exposed to, and be clear about what are the actions they need to take to reduce those risks. So it's very important to get deeper into what constitutes risk in your town. And understanding is one of the first steps in developing plans for preparedness and mitigation for any jurisdiction, but more importantly so for the hill towns. Because we sometimes always think that, okay, external help is going to come in. We are going to, our hospital is good enough, or our schools are built resistant to earthquakes. We always assume these things. but we really need to understand what all can happen before we start we start working on reducing the risk. So we look at one example slightly far away from most of us here in Delhi and in North India, a town which is beyond Bangladesh, almost in Myanmar, in Aizawl. Aizawl is the capital of the state of Mizoram, and it is a city which is a ridge-top city, a ridge-top on top of a ridge. You know, Aizawl and many of our hill settlements are not usually how settlements develop. Settlements normally develop around water. But Aizawl, here is one city which is on top of a mountain, far away from any water source. The water source is downhill, right at the bottom of the hill. There's a river Klang, which is quite far away. So this city actually developed around an old British army camp, a camp of the Assam Rifles, started by the British. And around this camp, a city developed and grew. Not an ideal place for people to live in because water was scarce, and it is still scarce, and they pump it from the river, which is a 7.5 kilometer pipeline itself. So Aizawl has a tremendous amount of risk. Let us look at how they have built. You see that every square inch of this city has been built. And if you see areas where there is no buildings, that is because the slope is clearly vertical. It is on vertical slopes. That is the only portion which they have left unbuilt. It is really an example, a fine example of the vulnerability of the built environment. And these are not single-story dwelling units we are talking about. We are talking about buildings which are mostly 8 stories and more. You can look at some of the buildings, count the number of floors in many of these buildings. They are at least 8 stories or higher, and that itself, building on a slopy ground, and that too 8 stories, is really asking for some either very good engineering or some engineering gymnastics. What we call engineering gymnastics, where you really don't know much about what you're doing. You're trying to balance everything. And but here is a city which has been built on complete slopes of nearly 60-degree slope, and you can look at the kind of density of construction, and you can imagine the number of people living in these buildings. And as one of my colleagues exclaimed when we went to Aizawl, even if there is a siren for everyone to come out, there will not be space in Aizawl for people to stand, side by side, because it's full of buildings. And the way they built now, because when you're building, if you want to construct a building, you have a plot in the middle of the hill, and if you are going to construct a house, you're going to cut the mountainside, and many a time you end up cutting the foundation of the person who has the building above you. You can see in this picture, the foundation of this person's column has been cut, and it is lying here on the ground. That is the way construction happens here, and the person who lives above has no problem with this way of construction, because he himself has possibly cut the foundation of the house above him. And once the construction is complete, they connect it up very nicely, and it is all plastered and good. Nobody knows about it. Nobody sees this problem that the foundation has been cut and rejoined. I hope everyone who is listening here understands that foundations cannot be reconnected. It cannot be. So even if we don't see this problem, because it is not obvious to us, the earthquake will find this out. The next earthquake will find out each foundation which has been cut, which has been compromised, and will affect the building. And you can imagine if one building comes down, what will be the status of the buildings below in that kind of a sloping hillside? So this is how most of our hill towns are growing up. This is, I mean, the photograph is from Aizawl, but it could be from Shimla, it could be from Gangtok, it could be from any of the hill towns which are growing at a rapid pace now. So what will be the effects of an actual earthquake on one of our hill towns? So to find this out, what will happen in a hill town during an earthquake? And the organization we work for, that is Geohazards International, we developed a scenario on the effects of an earthquake affecting Aizawl. We did this in collaboration, close collaboration with the Department of Disaster Management and Rehabilitation, DM&R, in the government of Mizoram, and developed the scenario of what can happen if an earthquake affects Aizawl. Aizawl, as you know, is in seismic zone 5. And as per our seismic zoning map, they can, any place in seismic zone 5 can be affected by intensities of earthquakes exceeding 9. You could have 9 and above earthquakes in any of the places in seismic zone 5. But in this, we have not considered a large event. We have only considered, an earthquake of intensity between 7 and 8 has been considered for this scenario. And there is a publication on this. This study was done between 2013 and 2015. It took about 2 years to understand what exactly can happen to the facilities in a hill town during an earthquake shaking. Aizawl is the capital of Mizoram. The population is about 300,000 plus. General awareness is high. That is something we noticed early enough, that everybody understands there is a problem, even though no one understands what the solution can be. And that is one of the reasons we and the disaster management department decided that there should be a scenario so that people understand what all can happen. And you see, this is the kind of construction which is happening here. Buildings on both sides of the building meet each other at the top, and many of the roads don't get any sunlight at all. It's like the equatorial rainforest where sunlight doesn't reach the ground. In Aizawl, many of the roads, the sunlight doesn't reach the ground because the buildings at the top are touching each other, and they really take the meaning of living with risk to a different level. I was looking at this landslide which has happened, and I saw this building which was nearly coming down. This is nearly falling down. And I was taking photographs when I realized there are people still living in this. There was a lady looking out of that window at me, taking photographs. I mean, people live in such conditions. That is, the kind of life there is in the hills, where you have to live with a lot of risk. And just to show you what happens in one of the main roads in Aizawl, the connecting road from the airport to the city. It's a 35-kilometer road, and close to the city there is a place called Huntar, and there is a landslide there, and a landslide which has been there for many years. I've been going to Aizawl from 2011, and this landslide occurs every year, creeping its way up and up the road, from one part of the road to another part of the road, uphill. One by one, you see the houses have been coming down. This photograph is taken in 2016, and when I went in 2017, two of the houses more have been consumed by the landslide, and this happens all the time. And this is one house was left when we went in 2018, and I got a new photograph where even that has disappeared. Now even this house was here, that has disappeared, and the landslide has reached from the lower portion of the highway till the upper portion of the highway, and the next probably it is going to eat up this portion of the highway and the houses on the other side. So this kind of landslides happen without earthquakes all the time in our hill towns. Every year during monsoon, we have landslides happening. And the scenario is one of the best ways of understanding risk. It tells the story of a realistic, but it's a hypothetical earthquake. But what happens, the potential impacts of an earthquake is what we have tried to study here. It is an illustration and it is not a prediction. If an earthquake happens, we're not saying, you know, an earthquake is going to happen. But if an earthquake happens, these are going to be the effects of the earthquake on your roads, on your water supply, on your electricity. So there are, and it needs a lot of expertise. Different sectors of expertise is required. It's science-based, so rigorous assessment of selected hazard events. And there is an estimate of how much each of these sectors will be affected in the event. And there is for this purpose, we had brought in several international experts, several experts from India within the country, but not from Mizoram, like professors from IITs, people from NGRI joined to understand the risk in Aizawl. They were experts on seismology, on landslide risk, on urban planning, disaster management experts, health system experts, earthquake engineering, and experts on water supply and electricity. And also community mobilizers were there. So it was an exercise where you have all of these people going to the community together to try and understand the effects, and also definitely studying the kind of losses the buildings will incur. In this example of Aizawl, there were clear demarcation of how construction happened before 1990. 1998, once the municipal corporation was in place, once the new regulations came in, the construction types varied and the vulnerabilities of these types also varied. So what we found out was if an earthquake of high intensity happens at 2 in the afternoon on a working day, this was decided with the disaster management department that we have not a maximum intensity earthquake, because when a large earthquake happens, a maximum intensity earthquake happens, and you see that your entire city is in rubble, it doesn't motivate action from any of the stakeholders. So that is why the DM&R decided that let us have a moderate intensity earthquake, but we kept it also during the daytime. The worst case scenario would be an earthquake happening during the night time. So high intensity earthquake during the daytime, and the power grid fails almost immediately. That is what the assessment people who assess the power grid mentioned, that the power grid will fail almost instantly. About 14,000 buildings will collapse during the earthquake. And most of the people are at work. Schools are in session because it's a working day. Hospital outpatient department has just closed at 2 p.m. And markets are crowded. Roads are jammed with traffic and fallen buildings. And families are separated. You can imagine people are at work during a daytime. Whenever we ask a question, is a daytime earthquake better or a nighttime earthquake better? Many people tend to answer that it is a nighttime earthquake, which is better. But what really happens during a daytime earthquake is that the families are separated. People are working in different offices. Some are at home, some are in their business. Children are in school. That is a much more traumatic experience than a nighttime earthquake when people are together, but facing the effects of an earthquake. Shaking would collapse about 14,000 buildings. This is the estimate for the kind of intensities which were expected. Most of these 14,000 buildings were of one type, poorly built reinforced concrete buildings. That is what we found out. And it would result in about 25,500 casualties. And this is the number of casualties from building collapses alone. This is the numbers which will happen immediately following the earthquake. As minutes pass, as hours pass, if people don't get rescued, if people don't get medical attention, the numbers are going to go higher. And this is in dry conditions, because in a wet condition earthquake, during a monsoon, if the earthquake happens, the number of landslides triggered will be also much, much more. And shaking and landslides are going to affect the utilities, the water supply, the electricity, and the transportation routes, the routes connecting the city to the rest of the country. So these are the other things which are going to be affected heavily, electricity, communication systems also, and these are all interdependent. Let us say take the case of the water supply. The water supply, the source for many of these our hill towns is from a river, and it is pumped up. So when electricity fails, the capacity to pump up water fails. Some of the cities may have a generator backup, but many a times the generators are also not anchored well. So in the earthquake shaking itself, the generators could fall off, or many of these generators may not have enough fuel to run for long time, because they are normally used to getting petrol or diesel from the nearby petrol pump, which will not be available during and after an earthquake. So when electricity fails, the water supply also fails. And if water supply and electricity have failed, you can imagine how the hospitals are dealing with the number of casualties coming in. Without electricity, they may still function, but without water, hospital really cannot function without clean water. So all of these are interdependent. And if, say, one transformer has failed, has fallen down, and you need to repair it or replace it, the road network is so important. To bring a transformer from, in the case of Aizawl, the transformer has to come through Assam. The road from Silchar to Aizawl will be a lifeline, but that is full of possibilities of landslides following the earthquake. If there is Gangtok, the transformer will have to come from West Bengal, and that road has several bridges and landslide prone areas. So all of these are interdependent, and all of these would fail together, which will mean that we will fail the people of that hill towns. Electricity system, we will not have time to go into detail about each of these systems, but they are all vulnerable. In case of Aizawl, there used to be a single source and 100% pumped. In the case of Shimla, about 85% of the water supply to Shimla is pumped up. And this is the similar case with many of our hill towns. And when electricity is lost, water supply is lost as well. When landslides happen, the road connectivity is lost as well. Road systems for Aizawl, there are three national highways which are connecting to neighboring areas. One to Manipur, one to Assam, and one is the airport road. And the airport itself may not be affected much by the earthquake, even though that is one of the tabletop runways in the country. Tabletop runways, is not very safe for aircraft landing. But in the case of this airport, the earthquake risk was not much, but the connection from the airport to the rest of the town is through a road 34 kilometers long, and has several bridges which look extremely vulnerable to earthquake shaking. So roads are going to be your lifeline. And just imagine the road to the main hospital in any town. If the road to the main hospital is blocked by, say, my apartment complex falling onto the road, do you think we will be able to clear the road to the hospital? If my family is trapped in that building, I will not allow you to come and clear that building till my family is rescued from there, or till the dead bodies are extricated from that building. That means you have lost that road. The road to the hospital is lost. So all of these we have to understand. We have to include in our disaster management plan. We cannot just say, okay, the hospital will handle so many casualties. But there are several other things, factors which will ensure that our hospitals are functional, our water supply is functional, our electricity is functional. So these are the special challenges that our hill towns face. The communication systems. When electricity is lost, most of our communication is lost. We may have one or two satellite phones, but the ability to charge those satellite phones and the handheld radios may not be much. So we include that also in our disaster management plan, that we need to be able to have backup charging facilities for these emergency communication systems. The systems, as I mentioned before, are interdependent, and each system is critical to sustaining lives in the days and the weeks following an earthquake. Everything depends on each other. And it is very important that all these people actually who work in the important decision makers in each of these departments come together to formulate the disaster management plan for the city and the district. Many a time what happens is, the disaster management plan is prepared by somebody who may not have ever consulted with the water supply department, may not have ever consulted with the electricity department or the telephone department, BSNL, or be it all of the mobile and normal service providers. So this is a critical part of disaster management for hill towns, and it is very, very important that we bring all of these actors together to discuss and decide on what can be done to ensure that the problems our hill cities will face can be addressed. The problems hill cities will face include the communications are down, no water supply, no backup. The fires can start. Many of the earthquakes are followed by fires because people will be cooking in the shaking, the fires can develop, and there can be short circuits. So, we talk about fires on one hand and the lack of water on the other hand. So you can imagine what is going to happen in such a situation. Disaster managers are scattered across the city. They may not be in one place. They may not be able to get together. We may have an EOC, but maybe people will not be able to reach the EOC. Road access to the city will be severed. Within the city also may be limited. Very few flat places to land helicopters. May not be heavy rescue equipment available. Children are at schools. That's a completely different problem which we have not even talked about. The entire city may be separated, but every family has somebody who is in school, and that kind of trauma the parents and the family members undergo when they think about the children in schools. What will the school do? The parents don't know what the school will do. Will they keep the children at school, or will they allow them to go? Is it safe for children, small children, to attempt to go back home on their own? When we start thinking about this, as a parent, I want to go and ask my child's school, do you have a plan? What is your plan? And I think it is the right of every parent to know. And it's very, very important that schools plan to keep children till the parents and children are handed over to the parents, because we do a lot of school safety drills. Where does the drill end? We have a earthquake drill or a fire drill. The children come out, and then the principal comes and addresses the children, and at the end of it, the principal says, okay, now go back to your classes. That will not happen in a real event. There is no going back to classes. It becomes the responsibility of the school to hand over the children to the parents. So we need to incorporate that also into our school disaster management planning, especially in the hill towns. When will help reach is a difficult question to answer, because when Nepal had the earthquake, we were able to reach there with help in the next 2 hours. But can we reach Gangtok in 2 hours? Can we reach Aizawl in 2 hours? I don't think so. So which means that Gangtok, the hill city, the Aizawl, many of the hill cities will have to have much more robust disaster management plans so that they can handle this on their own. Recommendations for cities in the hilly areas: know your land and how you are going to use it. Don't allow indiscriminate cutting, like Surya sir was mentioning. The human interventions are what causes landslides, and human interventions are what is going to cause landslides even after the earthquakes. Surface water. When water is an enemy of your land, allowing water to seep into your land is going to really increase the chances of landslides. Regulate slope cutting. Many cities, the cutting is indiscriminate. Even though in the building regulations, there is a clause that you need to bring a geologist before you start cutting. If you want to apply for a building permit, the instruction is that you need to bring a geologist to see your site before you start construction. But many places, what happens is they don't apply for the building permit at all. They cut it and then they apply for the permit. And by the time the geologist comes in from whichever department, the damage is already done. The slope has been modified. The landslide chances have been increased. So you need better regulations to regulate the cutting and sloping. And I think Aizawl has done a very, very good step. I think it's the only city in the country where there are slope modification. You cannot cut beyond a certain volume of earth without getting a geologist involved, without getting inspections from the municipal corporation. Enforce your building regulations. Encourage people to comply. Their compliance should come from the people. People should understand why regulations are important. Review the development plans. And your master plan may have been done 20 years back without really considering the earthquake and landslide hazard. Review them. It's time to, master plans are supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. And it is very, very important that people who review the master plans understand the risk as well. And as I said, people don't, the electricity people may not talk to the water supply people. The architects don't talk to the engineers don't talk to the geologists. It's very important to bring these people together, especially in our hill towns, to work towards a common goal of making our hills safer. So, and make sure your access, at least one of your roads should be engineered. Find out where the landslides can happen and mitigate those landslides. Find out which of the bridges which are in that one road are vulnerable and retrofit that bridge. Find out which buildings can collapse onto the road and block that road, because that is your lifeline and you need to preserve that lifeline so that help can reach you in times of disasters. Ensure your health facilities are resilient and ensure that they have water storage in storage. Your critical facilities should have water in storage and ability to run the hospital without external electricity for at least 3 days, by when we hope the help will come from outside. So hill towns have a lot of work to do. I think I'm out of my time. Anil is popped in. So I see Anil's face here. So I will go quickly, and these recommendations are very, very important as far as hill towns are concerned. There has to be within the government whatever decisions are being taken to understand the risk and let it be risk-informed decision making which will happen, and ensure that our health facilities and our schools, health and education facilities are prepared. There are special programs needed to ensure that our electricity supply remains at least will have several layers of backup so that life can and life support can continue after an earthquake event. Your risk sensitive planning is something very, very important. Aizawl Municipal Corporation has set very, very good benchmarks. They have actually developed a long-term mitigation plan for themselves, a 20-year plan by which they will develop better hazard maps, landslide hazard maps. They had set themselves a target that they will do this before 2018, and I think in 2017 they developed landslide hazard maps of 1:5,000 scale. Landslide hazard maps are available in Aizawl now, and I think it is possibly the only city in the country where you have 1:5,000 scale maps. The rest have 1:50,000 scale maps, which are not useful for planning. You need at least 1:10,000 scale maps for any kind of planning. And Aizawl has gone one step further, and it is the MIRSAC, the Geology Department, and the DMNR, which have developed for AMC the 1:5,000 scale map. And they also have, notified new regulations, the Aizawl Municipal Corporation Site Development and Slope Modification Regulations. This is a landmark thing. You cannot cut above a certain volume of soil. So this one step is mitigating future landslides. They will still continue to have landslides, but over the years, the chances of having humanly induced landslide are going to come down because of this this one step taken by the Aizawl Municipal Corporation. So in hill towns, my last two slides, we need to understand risk completely. What can happen in our hill towns? Each of our hill towns, the risk may be slightly different. So we need to understand what is actually going to happen in my hill town, each of our hill towns. We need tighter regulations. We need to develop scenarios, understand what can happen. We need to plan more in a response as well, and also mitigation. We need to think about the long term. Many a time, we have good training programs or a landslide risk mitigation program, but we need to actually have a long-term risk mitigation plan. Think of the next 20 years, what all can be achieved. So a roadmap is required for mitigation. And the missing geologists, that is one of my all-time complaints, that none of our hill municipalities have the services of a geologist. An engineer can build good buildings, but what happens below the ground, he is not the expert of what happens below the ground. That needs a geologist, a geotechnical engineer, which is missing in every one of our hill municipalities. And that is why we are adding to the risk in most of our hill towns. We need better guidelines for hillside constructions. There are some spiraling risks we are building up. We go to even from J&K, Himachal, Uttarakhand, we see new towns coming up, increasing populations, building onto more and more vulnerable slopes. So the way forward, the last slide, is we need policies, programs, and projects, to be more effective in making communities, especially the ones in hill areas, safer in the long term. And that will require some long-term vision. And this should be followed by the evaluation of the steps that need to be taken to prevent these things from happening in the scenario. And using mitigation planning techniques, we can systematically reduce the risk while not adding new risk. We don't want even one new building which will fall down to be built in our hill towns. We don't want a new pipeline to be developed without considering the landslide and the earthquake risk. We don't want to increase we don't want to add new risk. And that is how we can help our hill towns become safer. And this is something which needs our focused attention. And I'm glad NIDM has a separate division for this hill towns, because this is the need of the hour. And the more we work with our hill states in developing policies, in developing guidelines and regulations, the better our hill towns will develop, the safer our hill towns will develop. I will just conclude here and leave you with this one last slide, which is not coming up anyway. I mean, that is how I will conclude and say really thank you all for your time, and thank you for having me in this session. Thank you so much. Let us have safer hill towns and hill communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for providing insight on earthquake vulnerability of Himalayan states and also the mitigation measures recommendation we should adopt. Indeed, building collapse is the major element that raises the graph of fatalities during any earthquake episode. We do not appropriately consider disaster vulnerability of area during our any development activities. That is raising the risk to our communities and our infrastructure. Our Honorable Prime Minister, in his 10-point agenda, which is a blend of major international guidelines and agreement, has also advocated to mainstream DRR in our every development activities to ensure the resilience of our infrastructure and sustainable development. So we need to adopt and implement these strategies to strengthen the resilience of our key states. So there are a few questions for you. With the help of historical data of focus and epicenter of earthquake of any region, accompanied with artificial intelligence, would it be possible to predict the earthquake event? So, question is, with the historical data of focus and epicenter of earthquake of any region, accompanied with artificial intelligence, would it be possible to predict the earthquake event?
No. Simple answer. No.
No.
We cannot predict earthquakes. We have not reached there yet. And that is something we need to understand. We cannot predict earthquake. I would say our seismic zoning map is a prediction that tells you exactly where large earthquakes can happen, how big they can be, but it doesn't give you a date. It will not give you a date. We will not be able to get a date based on previous epicenters. We don't understand the earth enough yet. I mean, after all our scientific advances, after artificial intelligence, everything, we are not able to predict earthquakes. We have not been able to predict earthquakes. And I don't think we should discuss prediction of earthquakes right now in this forum, because we are looking at how to reduce our risk. And that is what we should focus our efforts on. Thank you.
And sir, next question is, do you think training, skill building of mention and construction workers would help with better urban planning? What can we do for exiting structures in these hill states?
Very, very important question. Very, very important to improve the skills of our masons, of every one of our construction fraternity. It's not just masons. Masons may not decide on the technology which they are using in a building. It is the architect, it is the engineer who decides on the technology. Masons are the final executors. They are important, but I think training is important for everyone in the construction fraternity, starting with the designer right up to the mason. And everyone needs to have their capacity. Capacity building is a very, very important component of risk reduction. And there has to be, there has to be, like I mentioned, we have to think of it in the long term. Having 2 or 3 mason training programs and having some photographs taken and sharing those will look good for some time. But, even after our mason training, there are other buildings which are being built by untrained masons. So we have to think of a strategy where we reach all of these masons. No construction can happen without by an untrained mason, and we have to reach that point. We have to reach the saturation levels, and every mason should be trained. And as I mentioned, it's just not the masons, we need to train everyone else as well.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us. Thank you very much. There are various challenges for sustainable development in hill states, and to discuss those challenges and their probable solution, I hand over the mic to Dr. Anil Prakash Joshi. He is environmentalist and founder Himalayan Environmental Studies Conservation Organization. His organization has been applying knowledge of environmental science and simple technology to bring consistent development to the rural village of Himalayas. Till date, HISCO has served around 5 lakh village people in nearly 10,000 villages spanned across 9 Himalayan mountain states. He is also recipient of Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan Award. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Also, I believe.
Yes, sir, you are visible too.
Thank you. I was hearing Hariji, very important. What he had shared with us is very, very important. And I believe that what he said when at the fag end, that Earth is the last truth. And the fact, this is a fact. And I would say that the Himalayan ecosystem is not at all understood. And I repeatedly say, even the statehood was granted to Himalayan ecosystem just to ensure that the right kind of a development occur there. And as well, the issues like disaster, earthquake, and flash floods, those have been repeatedly coming in the Uttarakhand state, in case if I take example of. But you know, what Hari had said is very honestly, this is what in the plan and the policy does not reflect in the states. And most of the states are all after so-called economy and infrastructure, as such no regulation as has ever been imposed. Because, you know, 2013 disaster of Kedarnath, Uttarakhand, and as well before that, there have been 2-3 earthquake, which we had personally been the part of it. And we always believe that the sufferer can only give you the best solution. And where we have to share the new knowledge and technology to help him. Now, I would say that sustainability, which we repeatedly have been using a word, which came from the Stockholm. But I'm to tell you that Stockholm sustainability had never worked. See, ever since 48 years now, 1972, it came. What is sustainable in whole 4 decades? Everybody, every one of us is well aware of it. No river, no mountain, no forest. The thing is sustainable, because sustainability is to be defined in a different way. It is belongs to subsistence first. Then if you are surplus, you share it, then it becomes sustainable. Even, you know, even today, if you look at no economy and ecology, both are not at all sustainable. And to add more important, why Himalayan ecosystems are important, it's not only for the people, countries in the world, which comes from the Himalaya, 35% population that we have. And honestly speaking, 1.9 billion people depend on food and energy in the water, the Himalayan systems. And therefore, a direct dependence, 240 million people. And we have been saying many times that the Himalayan system is to be considered as an Mumbai gets better place because it is said to be a financial capital and it draws a lot of attention globally. So is the case of Delhi as a political capital. We place Himalaya as an ecological capital because it is water, 10 major rivers, and everything that you inhale today, oxygen major part, 65% people depend in India only. And so the green white revolution that comes. So anything we talk of the Himalaya does not mean that it is only to Himalayas for the Himalayan community, but it's to serve the whole country, as I've spoken about it. And here, Himalayan ecosystem, that should be the baseline. If we begin with that, if we do not understand what the system is all about and never been tried as well, because do we any data currently we have 100 years of Himalayas? If we take 100 years ago a baseline, what changes have occurred in the ecosystem of Himalaya? We don't have any data based on that. And we shouldn't forget that it is a system where community inclusive ecosystem, where the culture is a very important, and the kind of culture that we had in the past were training us for conservation also. Current civilization, which involves so much of so-called development, infrastructure development, economy, so on, this civilization has encouraged the consumerism. So this is to be understood. When a culture-based infrastructure that we had in the past, it was to do a lot of things with the disaster, the flash floods, and many things. Flash flood will not keep much because it is because of the climate factor. They have now been repeatedly coming, but even other factors were all time considered while building the creating an infrastructure. So culture-based Himalayan ecosystem has always been a very important. And here the development was not the kind of word that we had been using. We rather used prosperity. There is a difference between the two. Development seems to be some solo, and development of road, development of dam, development this, development that. But prosperity is the right kind of a word, which I think Himalayas have and have been driven Himalayas. If I talk about the reason is the prosperity includes everything. It's inclusive kind of a growth, while development is a growth which is for a very specific. So there are two interpretations. I think there need to be, but major issue is it teaches us system. Consumer must be a contributor. Whomsoever is consuming, whatever way is being consumed, it has to be contributed, and that is the reason why this 1980 Forest Act came, and for saving the Himalayan ecosystem, it was imposed. I'll rather call that 65% land will remain under the cover, and the people's livelihood come from the agriculture and horticulture mainly, but it's a very small piece of land they survive with. But earlier the dependence was totally on the forest also, and that dependence was all-time good. The reason was today Uttarakhand is one state where the forest, which has become more than a disaster, because earthquake come 10 years, the kind of a cycle, flash floods now do not all-time hit. The forest fire is now frequently, even today. Yesterday I was reading a newspaper in the Almora and the Kumaon side, a forest has totally been under fire. Now the most important issue, which I think is to be discussed, is that the disaster of different nature, which we currently are suffering with. And if you really think of kind of a growth for the Himalayan systems, it has to be very inclusive. I will not say if it doesn't happen in a flat land, it would work. But in a place like Uttarakhand or fragile, marginality is another character, and inaccessibility, which is a major limitation for any relief that we think at the time of the disaster. So these are some of the features which are very important. And the kind of disaster, unfortunately, now we have, well, Of course, unfortunately, we do not have recent earthquake. But every year there is a flash flood now hitting the mountain people and the fire and so on. Now we can say the flash flood is because of the temperature which is globally rising. Antarctica is suffering, that everybody knows, but we shouldn't forget we are now called the third pole, where we have so much of ice. So saving Himalayas and the planning and policy for Himalayan system is not more only for the community, local community, but for, as I said, the millions of people across 1.9 billion people have been depending on Himalaya for different the resources that it has been producing. Now, coming what I would like, I would repeat what Hariji has said, which I fully agree with him. We really need to divide here. Hariji was very right that Simla, what is happening in Aizawl, he has given Mizoram some example. The huge building collapse in one, it was a little tremor of that earthquake that hit Nepal. But to be divided now, because as a social worker and activist, what happens when a disaster hit us, like earthquake, or similarly the other one, more victims are the villagers. The reason is, immediately whenever something happens of this kind, the place like Simla or a township we have within the mountain season, immediate some relief go into, because that is connected. That comes suddenly being a garment kind of office cluster there. There are something happens. But largely, we shouldn't forget that the Himalayan ecosystem we look into, we are hardly total population around in the Himalayan ecosystem, and the way the villages are scattered. Our approach of disaster management, most of the time, the construction is around the 10% of the total likely victim. If disaster, that is around the cities, sub-cities, and so on. But more importantly, the community poor villager do not have access to it. And that is the reason when we had been working and we at SCO are designing any tool for our approach, we believe that there have to be a right kind of a mechanism which currently we do not have. Right, we have to recommend something while doing a construction as a regulation, and it works more in the places which are close to the cities and the visual of the government development agencies. But what happens when something happens, when a retired army personnel goes back to his village and he built a house which he does not know what to be done and what not to be done? So in that case, we don't currently have any mechanism at all. Those regulation does not much work in that. So that's one issue which is very important. And I believe personally that when earthquake 192 came, and 99 also then hit us, the major cities like Uttarkasi and Chamoli, they were affected. A lot of risk relief and everything had gone into. But in the remote areas, even beyond 48 hours, we could not make our reach. That is one limitation which you really need to understand. And more importantly, I would like to say that to our experience, the 24 to 48 hours, the most crucial hour for the community. You see, ultimately, what is most important? To save a life, number one, and the property. There are two things which we immediately concerned when such disaster hit us. Now, you see, 24, 28 hours in the hills, if you think that relief can immediately go, that's not possible. Impossible. And our three experience have told us about it. that we have both losses, life and property, and unfortunately, we did not have any 2 decades of our statehood we were granted. How best we can save the local community immediately when the disaster hits. So I think there are 2 issues which comes in mind, so-called uh, preparedness. See, if ultimately it's the community who has to be saved, is the property to be saved, I think he is the first stakeholder which should be taken, must be involved in the task. The first thing, and what is the content of this preparedness is a very important. And I have been repeatedly saying to this that we have, every village around, we have got a primary school, and the primary school teacher in majority of times is a local person. And then there are schools which are called intermediate. I mean, in a group of villages, there is an intermediate school also. These 2 primary school teachers who are locally versed with the language, they are local people, they are everything, they can be better equipped. And because they have been teaching children in both standard, in the intermediate and in the primary school, some kind of inputs for the preparedness through the children to the community must go. That we have been saying, because otherwise we do not have any mechanism. We have civil society, of course, but within the government umbrella, we have the schools. And more importantly, I would like to say, this is important for immediate. None of us can go there at the time of a disaster. We do not know where exactly, as Hariji has said, one of the questions that was raised, whether we can, say earthquake may come at what time. No, it is just not possible. But I am to tell you that if 24 to 28, 48 hours, somehow anything we can do, help local community to understand the nature of or any other disaster, what can be the immediately done, and this and that. That mechanism is still not very perfect, not very well done so far. And we keep on suffering, again repeating, this may be the awareness within the cities, but the remote villages, we are not even available to them with this knowledge. Second important thing, there is then the immediately thing, there's a short-term issues. The short-term issues becomes number 1, the shelter. The shelter becomes very, very important. And the shelter may sometime, the people have been helping, a lot of relief material comes, which again become a chaos and a disaster. It doesn't reach people. It should reach on time. Everybody know that story, because we are not very organized in that. But at the same time, there are 2 issues which as an organization we had been working with. In villages, maybe different the case of Simla and the other township, it may be different issues. But here, in the villages context I am talking about, in a village context, if somebody collapse, fall down, so the same material can be used. And I'm giving you a very example, the great architect Laurie Baker, because I cannot say the same thing for the cities and towns in the mountain. I'm talking up in villages whose houses are age old, and if you go, 3 decades ago, any house that we locally 3-4 decades ago, they are made from material, the stones, the wood, and so on. And in majority of cases, the study done, one of the study was undertaken at Yamuna Valley, where the house were built of the wood, they all survived with all tremors. But in other places where they collapsed, it came because the stones were used, the local stones were used, but the matching of the stone, which give the strength, was very poor because the masons were not that way trained. But the Laurie Baker used Laurie Baker, and his services, he had been 3-4 times with us, because he was His roots were here also in Pithoragarh. So he came to help us to rebuild level within the village after the collapse of the building or the house, and then we tried to rebuild it. And only thing that required was that time, it was the stone, how to place the stone, the gaps should not be there, one that joints have to be taken care of, and putting a wood in between which is available. So I think that wonderfully worked. We built couple of houses in 1992 in Tehri, and then 1999 the Chamoli earthquake came. Those houses which were built by the with the Rory Bakers and HESCO jointly, they stood all time. And at the same time, some of the houses which were very close to it again had this problem. So what I'm trying to say is that a, a structural or construction technology and the material are very important issue for the mountain. Recently, what we have done in Uttarkasi, we have built with a house with the partnership with the Development Alternative, one group here in Delhi. We built 2-3 houses with a different set of demonstration using the local materials, sand and more, and try to make a demonstration. And that demonstration, we did not only keep it up to that, our villages around, the retired guys who comes back in the villages were trained also. If you are going to build any house, it is equally strong, because the mindset is also, they think that the brick house is stronger, because that kind of a mindset is to be in fact taken care of. And we as a voluntary organization do that. And the second important issue, see, that's what's the scenario. Let's see what happened when a disaster hits. Lot of things every media talk about, everything happen. Government become overactive in some of the cases, but slowly 2-3 months after, everything disappear, and the villager remain with their tuta house, और वो जब खेत भी गया, ये सब कुछ गया, उसके साथ बचे रहते हैं. I think that is the time. तो शायद उन लोगों के साथ, I'm talking again villagers, गांव की बात कर रहा हूँ, क्योंकि गांव बड़ा हिस्सा है हिमालय का, बनस्पत और छोटे मोटे शहरों के. तो गांव में इसी वो फिर अकेले पड़ जाते हैं, और फिर वही तमाम चीजें होती हैं, और ये बहुत कुछ दिखाई दिया है लगातार इन तरह की घटनाओं में. So what we tried as a group, what we did, we economic relief activities, we begin with that. Whatever they had in the village, we value added that, and the same value added products we brought, place like Dehradun, Delhi, sold it there, and that same gone back to the villager. Two things happened together. Number one, there was an immediate relief that they got, and same time they also learned at that time anything that they produce, if it's not sold, how it can be value added for fetching a better prices. So that kind of a relief equally become very important, because no help comes, and you know the government has trying that in a relief with mechanism, but does not happen much. And and I would like to say that, which he also pointed out, the local artisans will always remain very important. In the last 3-4 decades, what new science technology done replace these artists. People are they were mentioned, blacksmith, carpenter, and many other skilled member of the community did not have any jobs, because what they've been producing, it is now replaced with the product somewhere centrally produced in the flatlands, and it comes in the market because the quality is better because of this knowledge technology. But at the same time, a blacksmith loses his job. So is the case of, I'm giving very funny case. In villages, everybody, because all of us have root in the villages, गांव का बंदा जो गांव का आदमी जो नाई होता था वो हर एक घर में जाता था, बाल था, एंड देन ही इट वाज अ काइंड ऑफ बार्टर इकोनॉमी। बाल काटता था, उसके बदले उसको पैसे मिल जाते थे या अनाज मिल जाता था। And so was the case of the carpenter, and so was the case. Well, the things have changed. अभी नाई चला गया, नाई now doing a गांव का, we want to respect the village skill, but that guy barber now doing a job in Manrega somewhere, पत्थर फोड़ने का काम बेचारा करता है। What we tried as an trial लिया कि उसको उठाया और देहरादून में लाके उसको एक अच्छे बढ़िया सैलून में उसकी 1 महीने की ट्रेनिंग की, एंड देन वी सेंट हिम बैक। तो जितने यूथ हैं आज गांव के, वो हटाने के लिए वापिस आए। And so we did with the blacksmith also. We trained in other very good workshop down in the Dehradun town, city, and then we were sent back. What I'm trying to say that, you see, earlier structure, that community structure that we had all skilled community, and it was our approach, our knowledge, science had been replaced. It replaced that with the product. It would have been better that we would have, it would have been a very, earlier it was very Atmanirbhar Bharat, but हमने तो निर्भरता बदल दी, वो आत्म से बेचारे आत्मा हो गए, क्योंकि एक एक करके उनका जॉब खत्म हो गया। So what I'm trying to say, if we really serious about what Honorable Prime Minister had repeatedly said, so it has to be Atmanirbharta for everything, 48 hours कि Atmanirbharta, अगर कोई disaster आता है तो how they would manage. It has to be regular exercise for them in the community. And also economic activities become so important for them as a source of livelihood, they have to be given. And and I would say, I would like to add that we have in the villages of this country, there has all been an economic disparity. And a city, whether it becomes Simla or it becomes a city, there are many things available, managers are available, better management is there, their income is better in any case than in a villager. So there's always an economic disparity. What a poor villager does not get the prices of what he produces locally. At the same time, there is an ecological disparity also. Why I say ecological disparity? Those who are saving forest, those who are maintaining villages, those who are growing for us the orchards and the farm produce, the sufferer of ecosystem loss. Any disaster that hit us, and chain comes us, it hits you, hits villages more. So saving forests, making river, maintaining the ecosystem, serving those cities, rather consuming a lot of things, I mean, detrimental their products that they make. But the villagers who are saving the ecosystem are also ecologically suffering. So this ecological and economic disparity will not go long way. It's a high time that right attention, significant attention, because you shouldn't forget that a person living in a city will manage hundreds of things because he's rich, resourceful, and the villager are not. So let us be, and it is serious about while planning anything, and I absolutely agree that there is no as such, we have a plan where we have reached the villages, our remote areas, and that is not happening, and that's a more part of it. And I congratulate NDMA at the end that they are doing this exercise when there is no disaster. Otherwise, debate goes at the time when the disaster hits. It makes 2, 3 months, 6 months discussion, debate, dialogue, and then finish. But you are doing it at the time when there is no disaster. That will help us our future strategy. Thank you very much, Anil. And if there is any question, I can answer because I have to go for
Yes,
another.
yes, yes.
Please.
Thank you very much, sir. Indeed, before any kind of development-related construction activities, we should understand the Himalayan ecosystem. And yes, our Himalayan states are ecological capital, which beside serving the whole nation, also is important in curbing the carbon footprint and hence reducing the impact of climate change, the crucial challenge of today's time. So we need to be in our toe to save our ecological capital from the impact, from the risk of recurring disaster. And for this, enhancing the capacity of our local community is also crucial as they are victim as well as first responders. So there are a few questions. First one is, it is said that ecology and economy must go in hand. Could it be possible? If yes, then how do we bring it and how it would be helpful to enrich the lives?
Yeah, we currently are economy maniac society, and GDP is the mool mantra for us. Everything is GDP in the nation. The corona came for two news only in the newspaper. One was the GDP is falling, and another was the corona death. You see, no one, unfortunately, was serious about ultimately birth of the corona came from the nature that we have been disturbing. Therefore, if economy and ecology is to go together, because we shouldn't forget the more than 50% economy and GDP of the globe is out of the natural resources. We should forget, number one. Number two, why not we have parallelly another group measure, gross environment product, which we are working in the state. We had gone to the High Court saying that what economy state claim may not reach everyone, but ecosystem ecology is very important. How much forest that you have increased there, how much water of rain you have been able to harvest, what quality of air improved, what quality of air we have improved, and the soil enrichment that we collectively parallel to GDP, we need a gross environment product. I think then GDP and GEP, one ecology and another is economy will go parallel. This is what we are trying.
Sir, and next question is, when we talk about first responders, if we see healthcare infrastructure in states like Uttarakhand, people from places like Uttarkasi, Chamoli, Pithoragarh have to go to Dehradun, Haridwar, Haldwani for everyday emergency. So in case of disaster, how equipped are our doctors in these far off places in difficult terrain?
That is the reason I'm saying 48 hours, everybody can move out. But within the 48 hours, it is a community to be trained, local community be trained. My focus is after 48 hours, the government machinery comes, many helps come after. Even the helicopter begin to fly. But the only thing, 48 hours, if we give them some service, immediate service, we train the local community, that will be help. But in the later phases, after 48 hours and 72 hours, we have mechanism, the state services the community can use. But for immediate, that's what I'm saying. The first responder, I mean, the community life and the property are important to be saved. So therefore, we have to have a mechanism. Primary school teacher, intermediate school teacher. This is what.
Thank you very much, sir, for sparing your valuable time and sharing your experiences and thought with us. Thank you very much. Now I request Dr. Harjeet Kaur, Young Professional GMR Division, NIDM, to kindly propose vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Anilji. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this training program. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to Shri D.C. Rana, IAS Director cum Special Secretary, Himachal Pradesh State Disaster Management Authority, for sparing his precious time from his busy schedule for providing encouragement and support to all of us. And also I wish to express my gratitude to Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director, NIDM, for his encouragement and support in our every endeavors. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Mr. Hari Kumar, Coordinator, Geohazard International, and Dr. Anil Prakash Joshi, Founder, HESCO, for their presence to enlighten the participants with their vast knowledge and experiences. I also express my deep sense of appreciation to Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMRD, NIDM, who is the program chair of the training program. Last but not least, I am thankful to GMRD team, Mr. Anil Kathath, coordinator and moderator of this training program, Mr. Raju Thapa, host of today's training, Sobhit and Balaji for making this event successful. And on behalf of NIDM and HPSDMA, we wish all the participants a healthy and safe life. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you.